Good afternoon. My name is Michael Goldstein. I'm joined here today with my colleague, Nicole Resitar, and we're with the Phoenix Foundation for Conflict Resolution. Our purpose today is to provide you with is to independently analyze the impending decision of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers whether to grant easement under Lake Oahe. That's why it is our mission to come up with a decision that can be implemented with the greatest care and attention for all those who are directly and indirectly impacted by this decision. I just provided you with an overview. I'll then pass it off to Nicole to take through a stakeholder analysis. After that, we'll talk about the ethical analysis as well as the ethical framework that we use, followed by our recommendation and implementation of that recommendation, and then we'll wrap things up with a conclusion. With that, I'll hand it off to Nicole.
Thanks, Michael. So I'll talk about our stakeholders as they're really an important part of this impending decision. So the first stakeholder is the Standing Rock Sioux Nation. Their main concerns are involved with the degree of involvement in decision making as well as the impact that any consequences would have on their drinking water sources. Next is the environment itself. So the key concerns in regards to that is, again, the effects of any potential leaks or spills in the surrounding environment and drinking water. Third, our U.S. public interest. We know that there's some mixed sentiment about fossil fuel consumption as well as sustainable energy practices, so that is one of the main concerns for the U.S. public. And then lastly, we have business interests, and they're primarily concerned with the costs of delays in decision making as well as potential legal ramifications. So I'll pass it back to Michael, who will take you through our ethical analysis.
Thanks, Nicole. So we needed some sort of ethical analysis to evaluate this impending decision. So we identified three key themes in which our ethical analysis could fall around. The first is, are we doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people? In essence, how are the people directly and indirectly impacted by this decision, and are we going to be doing good, or are we going to be doing harm? And then the most important, fairness. Are we being fair? Because that's the one area that people are always going to question. So when we talk about fairness, we're talking about fairness of the decision-making process, either way, whether to grant access, go another route, or to completely stop construction at all. So that's where we had decided to use the utilitarian theory framework, which is choose the decision that has the best utility overall. And the best utility is one that does the greatest good for the greatest number of people and also does the least amount of harm for those that are directly and indirectly affected by this decision itself. Thus, we came up with three different alternatives. The first would be to cease the pipeline completely. The next would be to reroute and complete. If we briefly look at the advantages of ceasing, this would have no potential adverse effects of the cultural and human resources within the vicinity. When it comes to rerouting the pipeline, this would be the most obvious external portrayal of people thinking that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is really hearing the input that they are being given, and then completing the pipeline. This is the safest route, and I think that really is important and needs to be emphasized, and that also 41% of this pipeline is already in co-location of an existing corridor of pipeline. On the other side, if we go back to ceasing, that's up to $5 billion in lost economic output, and that comes from the Strategic Economic Group's financial analysis that they did back in 2014, and we've already seen that. And also, most important, the demand for oil isn't going away anytime soon, and if it doesn't come through this pipeline, it's going to be transported through more hazardous modes of transportation. Next, to reroute the pipeline, you put a town of 60,000 people at risk. It also crosses more waterways, which we'll show later when we select our alternative. And if we complete the pipeline, the main disadvantage is there will be further disagreement amongst parties about how to come about this decision. So I'll hand it back to Nicole to go over how we selected that alternative.
Thank you. So in order to evaluate these three different alternatives, we've done a graphical depiction of consequences for each alternative. So first you see the cease, reroute, and then complete alternatives, and we see the positive on the bottom and then the negative consequences on top. So through a more thorough analysis, which we'd be happy to share with you after our presentation, we were able to first eliminate the cease alternative. So that leaves us with the reroute and complete alternatives. So in order to compare these, we chose a different number of evaluation factors, primarily land and water, to kind of assess the different environmental impacts. And as you can see on the furthest right-hand side, the completing alternative of the pipeline does leave us with the most favorable outcomes. So if we pull out the complete alternative and view a graph of the consequences, positive and negative, for each economic, social, and environmental type of consequences, we can see that the positive consequences largely outweigh the negative consequences for each type of consequence. So that brings us to our recommendation. And our recommendation to the Army Corps of Engineers is to go ahead and grant easement underneath Lake Oahe in order to complete the pipeline as proposed. We have 4 facets to our recommendation, so we'll talk about those 4 components right now. First would be for the Army Corps of Engineers to issue a public statement outlining the facts and reasoning behind this decision. Second would be to advise Energy Transfer Partners to set aside a certain amount of funds that would cover the cost of responding to a moderate leak or spill. Third, we would have the Army Corps of Engineers rescind that December 4th memorandum and retract the notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement. And lastly, we would encourage the Army Corps of Engineers to collaborate both with Energy Transfer Partners and the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe in order to assist in the protester cleanup of the waste in the area. So now I'll pass it back to Michael and talk about finances.
So with any recommendation, there are financial costs. The main costs associated with issuing the statement are not additional costs, but yet that's what it would normally cost your department in terms of the hours that it would take to issue the statement. And then cleaning up of the protester area. While this is a significant cost, and we've done a scenario analysis with it, a lot of this money, the Standing Rock Sioux have already said that they would use donated funds in order to clean up with the protester area. We want to emphasize that this is an amazing opportunity for all parties involved to then come together and do this cleanup, but that is the majority of the cost. And if the Standing Rock Sioux end up helping, contributing, and paying for this, then the total cost of our recommendation is only between $4,500 to $6,500. In terms of the implementation, over the first 2 months, that's when we see the issuing the public statement occurring and the rescinding the memorandum and withdrawal notice of intent, and starting to move away from that fragmented decision making which we have seen in the past. And this public statement would be educational in nature. It also solely really focuses on what is facts and what is not, because there's so much hype around this event that it's time to really clear things up. And then also over the next 6 months is when the compile funds and clear protester occupation area would occur. And that's more of a conservative estimate, and as soon as the cleaning up of the protester area occurred is when the construction would occur, and so that could happen sooner. So I'm going to hand it back to Nicole to wrap things up.
Thank you. So we talked about our recommendation, and now we have some goals moving forward for the Army Corps of Engineers. This is to increase transparency, engage in meaningful conversation, consult both expertise from both sides of the equation, and maintain consistency moving forward from now into the future. Thank you so much for your time here today. We'd be happy now to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Elon University.